Now that we have successfully created a JSON file, let's say we go ahead and see what's inside of the file. So what I'm going to do is go back to the folder where we save the file. I'm going to go to File, Open, and here I'm just going to go ahead and paste and search for the JSON file so we could see the content. So I'll go ahead and click on Open, and I'll make this Python. And as you can see, look at that. We have the name of the control object along with the radius channel as a string, and as a value we have the value connected to the radius channel, and then separating that in this dictionary is a colon. So what we see here first on the left side is the key, and on the right side would be the value. So whenever we call upon the key, we'll be able to literally find the value. So that's the exciting part. We have all of the information. Now, how do we use it? It's going to be really straightforward. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this file. And before we continue, I'd like to talk about commenting, just in case you like to add notes, because sometimes you come back from, let's say, another project and you open up a script and you're wondering how it works. So it's always a good idea to add notes. So comments are simply lines that Maya will ignore, or literally the code will ignore, but it's a great way for you to keep, again, all of your tools annotated. So if you want to add a single line comment, for example, here on line 3, you might add a space, or one more line, I should say, just to separate my modules from the rest of the code. And then here, I'm just going to go ahead and add a hashtag. And then I'm going to say something like, let's say, get data path. So all this is doing, as you can see, the line is now a red color, letting us know that it is going to be ignored, and it's just a way of us remembering what this variable does. And so you could do that across your code. For example, when you're ready to, let's say, convert your list type into a dictionary type, you can go ahead and do that here. You can go ahead and say hashtag convert list to dictionary. Sweet. So comments are super important. You could also add multi-line comments. So if you like to do that, I might go back to line 3, move down a few more spaces. For multi-line comments, it's 3 single quotes. So 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. So we'll add 2 sets of 3 single quotes, and inside we can go ahead and add information. So we could say something like save control sizes, and then hyphen JSON, and then underneath we can say email at me@me.com. So you get it. So these multi-line comments are super useful in case we would like to just add more information, maybe usage on how the tool works. We could add that up here. Fantastic. All right, sweet. So now that we have this kind of commented, what we can now do is create another Python tab so that we can now load in the file, and it's going to be very straightforward, easier than saving the data. So let's go to new tab and then type Python. We'll do the same thing. We'll go ahead and say from Maya import CMDS. Now keep in mind that CMDS is something that Maya recognizes natively when coding with Python, but if you're coding in an external editor, if you're really serious about tools, it's necessary to add this to the top of your code just to make sure that we always import in our Maya command module inside of Python. Otherwise you can run into errors. So now we're also going to import JSON again. And keep in mind, we've already done this, but again, we are thinking ahead. What if this is the first time we're running this? Well, if that's the case, we need to make sure that at all times the code will import in the proper modules. Fantastic. So now it's time to get started importing in the data. So what do we do first? Let's go ahead and get the data path. So if you want, you can go back to the first tab, and you could go ahead and just copy that. And now we could go back to the next tab and paste. All right, so this is where we find the file, right? So now that we know where to find the file, now we can go ahead and move to the next line. And here is where we are going to use with open again from JSON. So that's going to be with open, and then we'll add our open and close parentheses. Now here we want to access the file, right? So what is that going to look like? Well, that's going to be another concatenation. So that's going to be data underscore path. And if you need to, feel free to copy the variable name so we can avoid syntax errors. And then what do we need to do? Well, we need to concatenate, right? We need to bridge this with the name of the file. So that's going to be an add operator, and then that's going to be 2 single quotes. And inside of this, we use the name of our file. So if you need to, you can either go back to the first tab where you created the name for the file, or you could go to the directory and copy the name of the file, including the .json. So either way, let's go ahead and grab that name again. And then we paste it inside of our quotes. All right, so now that we have the file, now we need to read it in. So that's going to be comma space, and then another set of single quotes, and then R for read. And that's it for that. And now outside of our parentheses, we'll go ahead and say as, and here, this is where we create another variable, and we could just call this ctrl underscore rad colon. All right, so this variable is going to be used to store this inside of another variable so we can access the contents inside of our JSON file. So watch this. Now, after the colon, we hit enter on our keyboard. That gives us the indent on the next line. And here is where we create the variable. Let's go ahead and call this JS for JSON ctrl rad. So we'll have this equal to, well, equal to what? Super simple. That's going to be JSON dot load. So now we're ready to load in a file. And what's the file? Well, remember, we stored it here in this variable. So that's ctrl rad. Let's go ahead and copy this and then paste that inside of the parentheses. That's simple. Sweet. So here's the cool part. Let's say we move down a few lines, and again we need to exit the indent here since we're done with the code block that allows us to load in our information. And let's say we go to print. So we'll go to print, open and close parentheses, JS ctrl rad. Now let's go ahead and see what this gives us. So I'm going to copy that and paste that inside of the parentheses and then run this. There it is. So we have all of the data. Take a look at that. So all of the information is now stored here. Now, how do we use this? You're probably wondering, okay, we've gotten to this step. How do we actually use this? Well, here is the cool part. Let's say if we wanted to basically find, let's say, the value of one of our controls. So we could go ahead and do something like this. We can go ahead and say print JS ctrl rad, and inside of the parentheses, right after rad, we'll add an open and close bracket as if we were grabbing the index, but in this case, since it's a dictionary, it's going to be represented as a string. So let's go ahead and test one of these. Let's go ahead and say we grab the first one here, which is character back annum radius, everything here, including the quotes. So if this works, it should give us a printout of 15 as the radius. So I'm going to paste that, including the quotes here. So if this is successful and we go ahead and run this on line 10, look at that, we get the value 15. How exciting. Now let's make sure this is working. How about the global control? So what if I were to copy this string, including radius and the quotes, and then paste that inside of these brackets? So it's a fun way of indexing where we're using a string type to get to the precise value, and there it is. It's working perfectly. All we have to do now is iterate through all of our controls and reapply this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be bold and brave because we should always do that, and I'm going to remove the rig again. I'm going to leave the template because we need that to build the rig, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. And I'm going to bring back my template. There it is. And I'm just going to go ahead and recreate the rig. So I'm going to type CHR and then choose create rig. And there we go. Uh-oh, everything's messed up, but in no time at all, we'll have it all applied so that our radius is applied to each of the controls stored in the JSON file. And this won't take much time at all. So what do? Well, if we go back to this first tab again, you remember when we selected all of our controls, it's time to do that again. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy line 12 and 13 here, where we basically select all of our controls and store them in a variable. So here, I'm gonna get rid of line 10 and I'm gonna go ahead and paste. So now we have all of our controls selected. Once we have the control selected and we have our variable, what we're gonna do now is basically create a way to iterate through each of our controls and apply the value. So here, we're going to find the amount of controls in our selection. So let's go to name that variable size, and we'll have this equal to len, open and close parentheses, and inside, that's going to be ctrls. So it's going to copy that and paste that inside. So all this is saying is I want the amount or length of nodes stored inside of this variable. And if you want to, you can go to run line 10 through 12. And then if you go ahead and just highlight size and run that, it should give you a list of the controls. And there it is, 75. Fantastic. So now at this point, it is now time to iterate through this and finish up. So let's go ahead and get to it. I'm going to move down to the next line. And now we're going to basically say for each of the controls using our iterator. So a different type of for loop here. For I, which can just stand for iterate, for I in range. And what is our range? So after range, we'll go ahead and add our open and close parentheses, and inside we'll type size, right? Because that is the amount of controls in our selection, and that's what we want to apply the radius values to. And we already know how this works, because since we can grab all of our controls, it's just a matter of finding the path to the radius, and then once we call upon that key, we get the value from the JSON file, and we're done. So for I in range size, we'll add our colon. Now we can move to the next line. There's the indent. And now it is time to finish up. So the first thing we want to do is basically create a variable for the control and radius like we did before, right? So remember when we did this here, let's just go ahead and copy this. So that's control rad equals the control name and then the radius name. So we'll go back to Python. We'll go ahead and paste that first. There we go, inside of the for loop. So now we have, again, the control name and the radius as we've seen it here in the JSON file as the key, right? And it's stored here, so it's going to be easy to apply. Now we go to the next line, and here's the fun part. We're ready to set our value. So that's going to be cmds.setAttr. Remember, we used getAttr to get the attribute value. Now it's time to set the attribute value. So inside of our parentheses, after setAttr, we're going to say set what? What do you want to set? I want to set the control radius, so ctrl rad, comma space. What do you want to set it to? So here's the fun part. Let's go ahead and grab this JS ctrl rad variable here that we created for the ability to load in our JSON file, just the variable name. And with that copied, we're simply going to use that as what we set our value to. And remember, whenever you call upon the key, you get the value as you saw, right? So now it's just going to be a matter of saying paste, and then we'll add our open and close bracket, and inside of this, we simply put the same path, ctrl rad. So I'm going to copy this and paste that inside. All right, here we go, drum roll. So let's see what happens when we run this. It's not quite applying this, but let's go ahead and see how we can make this work. So I'm going to go ahead and break this down. Where do you think the issue is? Well, we're trying to use a format that we used in the previous lesson, but now we're having to deal with a different type of for loop. So we need to iterate through each of our controls using I. So let's go ahead and try this again. Instead of this ctrl rad, we need to use this variable, which is ctrls. And here's what it's going to do. If I go ahead and go back to line 11 and I move down to the next line and I say print, open and close parentheses, now if I go ahead and take this variable, including the s, ctrls, all of this, paste, and add bracket, let's say 0. Watch this. Now when I print line 12, it's going to give me one of my controls, the first control on the list. So this is what we're missing, but instead of 0, we need to iterate, and that's what the I is for. So here is where we get to fix this. I'm just going to go and clear out line 12 now, and we're going to go back here, and we're going to use ctrls. We're going to go ahead and paste that, and then we're going to add bracket, and what do we put here? Not a 0, but instead we're going to use I because it's iterating. One at a time, it's going through the information for this list. So if we go ahead and now use this, we can still use the same variable, ctrl_rad, but now it's looking at the iterative form here as defined by this iterative for loop. If we run this, there are our control sizes. How exciting is that? So in no time at all, we were able to not only create a really neat JSON file so that we can store information, but then we learn how to quickly apply the information using a simple for loop. Exciting stuff. So thanks for watching, and I hope you find this useful. I challenge you now to use this more creatively for storing data within your own projects.